Tap Talk is the Drinking Water in Rural America podcast. Here's a peek at episode 12.
Sure. Well, I mean, someone that I learned about a few years ago and I like to talk about, and, when we're doing a water training on disinfection or something like that is Dr. John Leal. He was a water treatment specialist and physician who lived in New Jersey during like the second half of the 19th century and into the early 20th century. His work and the courage around his work really spearheaded disinfection of public water supplies in the United States in the early 1900s. Typhoid outbreaks were very common during that time. His father was a surgeon in the Civil War who died from a complication of some waterborne disease, and that probably drove some of his interest in this line of work. He was actually an advisor for the Jersey City Water Supply Company, where in 1904, they had just constructed like a surface water system supplying about 40 million gallons of untreated water to Jersey City per day. And at that time, they had these high typhoid death rates, something like 80 to 100 per 100,000 people, which is, I would say it's, difficult to imagine, but unfortunately with COVID these days, I mean, I think that the nationwide COVID death rate is something like twice that right now, but nonetheless, it's a huge problem, typhoid at that time. Typhoid is a bacteria. It's a type of waterborne disease common in parts of the world with poor sanitation. And that was really the case with some of these bustling industrial areas in the Northeast in the late 1800s. We as a society, I think we had just started to recognize the impact of, being around our sewage and our waste all the time. And so they thought that, the bad air from some of the sewage and the smells associated with it, that miasma theory, was driving the sickness. So they constructed these centralized sewer systems to pipe their sewage away. It would end up in the waterways which are also being used to supply public water systems in these same cities. But back to Jersey City and the problems they were facing, the city sued the Jersey City Water Supply Company, saying that the water they were being provided wasn't pure and wholesome. I got a kick out of that. That's in the contract. It says that the water needs to be pure and wholesome. At the time, chlorine had been used sort of experimentally in Europe to control typhoid outbreaks. But Dr. Leal, who was an advisor for the water supply company, knew of its use and he had used it in some of his own work in the past. So, essentially he devised a way with, a well-known sanitary engineer at the time to start injecting small amounts of a chloride of lime solution into the public water supply, which, at the time, the public would have been outraged to know this was happening. Chlorine was considered to be a poison, and there was a lot of, concern about putting it in the public water supply. But, and again, this is years, obviously, 65 years before the Safe Drinking Water Act. There was no EPA to regulate this sort of thing. But in any event, he starts dosing chlorine into the public water supply, and it was a drastic improvement on the water supply. People stopped getting sick. The court decided with Dr. Leal, and once that happened, it was something like within 5 years, over half of all the people on public water systems in the United States were drinking chlorinated water. So that whole story, of Dr. Leal and how he started Jersey City, New Jersey, becoming the first continuously disinfected water supply in the country in 1908. That was told in a book that came out. Dr. Michael McGuire, I think it was a few years ago, wrote a book called The Chlorine Revolution, which I read a few years ago and really enjoyed. So Dr. Leal, I would say. Long answer to your question, sorry.
You can listen to the full episode and learn more about the show at drinkingwaterpodcast.org.